Chelsea did not rediscover their form at the Valley. They simply stopped pretending they had lost it. The 5 unanswered responses to Charlton's solitary consolation told a story that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with atmosphere. Core analysis. There is a particular kind of paralysis that affects expensive squads. It is not visible in training clips or tactical boards. It exists in the millisecond of hesitation before a pass is played, in the dropped shoulder that should have been a driving run, in the glance toward the touchline instead of the goal, in the safe pass backward when the forward ball begged to be played. Chelsea had been suffering from this paralysis for weeks, not because they lacked ability, not because the tactical instructions were flawed, not because the opponents had discovered some weakness to exploit. They had been suffering because they had been breathing toxic air. The oxygen that sustains competitive performance had been replaced by something corrosive. When Enzo Maresca stood before the press after beating Everton in December and spoke of his worst 48 hours at the club, he did something irreversible. He exhaled poison into the ecosystem. He made private dysfunction public property, and every player who read those headlines, who scrolled through those quotes, understood something fundamental had shifted. The man leading them had signaled distress. In football, distress is contagious. It spreads through dressing rooms faster than any virus. The final weeks under Maresca were not a tactical failure. They were an environmental collapse. A manager at war with medical staff. A hierarchy questioning competence. Supporters who sang louder for a former manager visiting with another club than they ever did for the man in charge. These are not conditions that produce flowing football. They produce survival mode. And Chelsea had been in survival mode since mid-December, protecting themselves psychologically while going through the motions physically. Then came New Year's Day, the departure, the reset. Callum McFarlane steadied the ship at the Etihad. The structure held against Fulham despite the red card, but Saturday evening at the Valley represented something different entirely. Liam Rosenior walked into the technical area for the first time, and what emerged from Chelsea's players was not the product of new training sessions or innovative formations. He had been in charge for days, not weeks. There was no time to install a system. There was only time to install permission. Permission to breathe. Permission to express, permission to remember why they were purchased for significant sums in the first place, permission to fail without fearing the consequences would extend beyond the pitch. Watch the body language from the opening exchanges and a difference is apparent. Heads were higher, movements were sharper. There was an absence of the tentative glances that had plagued Chelsea's recent performances, the constant checking of positioning, the over-communication that signals uncertainty, the defensive body shapes even in attacking positions. All of it had dissipated. Players moved like they trusted their environment again. They played like men who had been told definitively that the Civil War was over. The internal battles had ceased. The only enemy remaining wore red and white. Charlton entered this fixture as a club in their own form of crisis. 19th in the championship. One victory from their previous 11 matches. Relegation anxieties mounting with each passing fixture. The confidence that had marked their early season surge when they sat as high as 5th in the table had evaporated entirely. Nathan Jones had provided defensive solidity in patches, but the creative output had dried up. The goals that flowed in October had become a trickle by December and a drought by January. They were, in the kindest analysis, a side clinging to survival with fingernails and faith. The popular narrative before kickoff suggested an FA Cup upset was possible. That Charlton's passion and the occasion might compensate for the gulf in individual quality. That the sold-out crowd at the Valley, the largest FA Cup attendance at the stadium in 50 years, might generate something extraordinary. That Chelsea, wounded and unstable, might falter against determined lower league resistance. This narrative was demolished within the opening half hour, not because Chelsea played sublime football, but because they played liberated football. There is a distinction. Sublime football requires perfection. Liberated football requires only the absence of fear. Chelsea showed the latter. Players took risks they had abandoned in recent weeks. Runners made runs without looking back for approval. The weight of Stamford Bridge politics had been left at the training ground, and what traveled to South London was a squad suddenly reminded of its capabilities. The possession statistics told their own story. Over 70% for the visitors. Nearly 30 attempts on goal compared to Charlton's 11. The home goalkeeper was forced into double-digit saves. These are not the numbers of a team finding their feet under new management. These are the numbers of a team finally playing without shackles. The psychological transformation was too sudden, too complete to be attributed to coaching. Rosenior did not teach Chelsea how to play in 4 days. He simply removed the obstacles that had prevented them from playing as they already knew how. Charlton deserved their own examination beyond the role of supporting cast. Miles Lieburn's response carried weight. It was not a lucky deflection or a moment of opposition generosity. It was a genuine strike, a reminder that championship forwards possess quality that Premier League defenses must respect. But one moment of quality does not alter the fundamental truth of this fixture. Charlton were overwhelmed not by Chelsea's brilliance, but by Chelsea's willingness to engage with their own brilliance once more. Nathan Jones will speak of his side's effort. He will reference the circumstances. He will point to the injury list and the fixture congestion and the quality differential. All of this will be accurate. None of it will be relevant. Charlton were not beaten by Chelsea the football club. They were beaten by Chelsea the liberated entity. The timing was cruel for the hosts. Had this fixture arrived 3 weeks earlier, with Maresca still in psychological warfare with his superiors, with players uncertain of their standing and their direction, the outcome might have been different. Not necessarily a victory for Charlton, but perhaps a tighter contest, perhaps a genuine cup tie. Instead, Charlton became the first opponent to face Chelsea after the clouds had cleared. They received the full storm. There is a temptation to credit Rosenior for what unfolded, to construct a narrative of immediate impact and managerial magic. This would be premature and unfair to the complexity of what actually occurred. Rosenior inherited a squad that had been underperforming their talent level for weeks. He did not transform them. He released them. The distinction matters for understanding what comes next. If Chelsea believe their struggles were tactical, they will expect Rosenior to solve them tactically. If they understand their struggles were atmospheric, they will recognize the true work begins now that the pressure valve has been released. The Valley witnessed something simultaneously impressive and misleading. The scoreline suggests dominance. The performance suggested relief. Chelsea were not magnificent. They were present in a way they had not been for weeks. They attacked with intent instead of obligation. They defended with focus instead of anxiety. These are not qualities a coach instills in days. These are qualities a coach permits to resurface when the environment allows. Charlton's season continues with greater concerns than a cup exit. The championship table offers no comfort. The performances in league fixtures offer less. Jones must find solutions to problems that predate this result and will outlast its memory. But for Chelsea, this evening carries different implications. They must now determine whether the performance was a release of built-up capability or a temporary reaction to changed circumstances. The League Cup semi-final against Arsenal arrives in days. The Premier League demands consistency that cup competitions do not. The question is not whether Chelsea can repeat this scoreline. It is whether they can maintain this psychological state. Football clubs are ecosystems. They require balance between ambition and stability, between pressure and protection, between challenge and support. The best environments push players to improve while providing the security needed for risk-taking. They demand excellence while accepting imperfection. They foster competition while maintaining cohesion. Maresca's final months disrupted this balance irreparably. His public frustrations, his conflicts with staff, his declining relationship with supporters created an environment where even exceptional individuals could not perform exceptionally. The talent remained untouched. The chemistry curdled beyond recognition. Players who had functioned as a unit began operating as isolated individuals protecting their own positions. The collective pursuit gave way to individual survival strategies. What Rosenior offered on Saturday was not a new system. It was not a revolutionary tactical insight gained from his time in France. It was not the product of intensive video analysis or innovative training methods. It was a new atmosphere, nothing more, nothing less. The players responded to it like plants respond to sunlight after weeks of clouds. This does not mean Rosenior is the correct appointment for the long term. It does not mean Chelsea will sustain this level through the demanding months ahead. It simply means the squad's underperformance was never about the squad. It was about everything around the squad. Remove the dysfunction, strip away the politics, eliminate the daily drip of negative energy, and the quality surfaces naturally. This should concern Rosenior as much as encourage him. He did not create the performance through any intervention of his own design. He merely did not prevent it from occurring. The real examination begins when pressure returns, when opponents arrive with genuine resistance and tactical complexity, when the squad must produce without the novelty of liberation and the emotional release of a fresh start. Charlton returned to championship reality with wounds but without shame. They faced an opponent who had been suppressing themselves for weeks and chose this precise evening to remember who they were. The margin appears severe. The context provides some mitigation. Jones will remind his players that cup competitions are bonus territory for sides fighting relegation. He will redirect focus to the matches that matter for survival. He will treat this evening as an isolated event rather than a referendum on his methods. For Chelsea, the interpretation must be more careful. Celebration is natural. Relief is warranted. But understanding is essential. This performance was not the arrival of something new. It was the return of something buried. The squad did not suddenly acquire ability. They stopped hiding from their own ability. Rosenior happened to be present when the hiding ended. His contribution was necessary but not sufficient. He provided the conditions. The players provided the response. Both elements required the other. The Valley will remember this evening as another chapter in the long history between these clubs. A London derby with predetermined outcome. A Premier League giant dispatching a championship struggler with clinical efficiency. The first meeting between these sides in nearly 2 decades, and one that reminded everyone precisely why that gap had developed. The attendance will be noted in record books. The result will fade into statistical archives. But the psychological truth of what occurred deserves longer examination and deeper interrogation. Chelsea proved nothing about their potential against Charlton. They simply stopped denying it. They stopped hiding from their own ability. They stopped playing scared. Final verdict. The most dangerous opponent Chelsea will face this season was never on another team's payroll. It was the atmosphere they built around themselves. The question now is whether removing the architect of that atmosphere was enough or whether the foundations remain.